The meticulously kept, but perpetually quiet, two-bedroom house of Arthur Finch was a sanctuary of silence. At his dining table, bathed in the soft, fading light of a late afternoon sun, Arthur, a man in his late 60s, sat alone. A single plate held his dinner, a portion of baked chicken, its skin a pale gold, beside a small mound of steamed green vegetables. The only sounds were the gentle, rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall and the soft, almost apologetic clinking of his fork against the ceramic plate. The empty chair opposite him, perpetually pulled out but never occupied, was a constant, aching reminder of Eleanor, his late wife, who had passed 5 years ago. Her absence had swallowed every sound, every shared laugh, leaving behind an echoing void. Arthur's days had settled into a monotonous cycle, a routine of predictable solitude. Mornings began with the rustle of the daily newspaper, its headlines a distant hum against the quiet of his breakfast. Mid-mornings were spent in the garden, meticulously tending to the rose bushes Eleanor had loved, each pruned stem a quiet act of remembrance. Afternoons were reserved for reading, the turning of pages a soft counterpoint to the quiet hours. And then came the short, solitary walks, his footsteps muffled by the suburban pavement, a silent journey through streets where other lives unfolded in vibrant bursts of chatter and laughter. His only living relative, his niece Clara, lived hours away, her dutiful but infrequent phone calls a polite bridge across a vast emotional distance. Curled under the dining table, a silent shadow, lay Buster. He was a scruffy rescue dog, a mixed-breed mutt whose lineage was a mystery. One of his ears flopped at an endearing angle, perpetually anxious eyes darting occasionally towards Arthur, then back to the floor. Others saw Buster as clumsy, an unremarkable creature whose small size for his breed meant he was often overlooked by potential adopters at the shelter where Arthur had found him 5 years ago. Shortly after Eleanor's passing, he barely made a sound. A quiet companion in a quiet house, a furry extension of Arthur's solitude. He wasn't the kind of dog that bounded or barked with exuberance. He was a presence, a warmth, a quiet breathing shadow. Despite Arthur's gruff exterior, a defense mechanism built over years of quiet sorrow and the pervasive quietness of his life, he held a deep, almost unspoken affection for Buster. This devotion wasn't expressed in grand gestures, but in the small, meticulous acts of care. Every morning, Arthur would prepare Buster's meal with the same precision he applied to his gardening. He would carefully measure out the kibble, ensuring the portion was exact, and then, a ritual he never missed, he would add a spoonful of leftover baked chicken or steamed vegetables from his own plate, just for Buster. He'd watch as Buster devoured it with a quiet enthusiasm, a small, private moment of shared warmth that transcended words. One rare sunny afternoon, Arthur deviated slightly from his usual solitary walk. He took Buster to the small, overgrown park at the edge of their neighborhood. It wasn't a manicured park, but a wilder patch of green with ancient oak trees and a winding dirt path. He pulled a worn, faded tennis ball from his pocket. It had been Eleanor's, a relic from happier, louder days. He threw it, not with force, but with a gentle lob. Buster, despite his usual clumsiness, reacted with surprising agility. He bounded after it, his floppy ear flapping, his tail wagging furiously. He retrieved the ball, not perfectly, sometimes tripping over his own paws, but with a joyous bark that resonated with a pure, unadulterated happiness. This simple act, this unreserved display of canine delight, prompted a genuine, rare smile on Arthur's face. It was a fleeting glimpse of the warmth hidden beneath his solitude, a crack in his gruff exterior, revealing the gentle soul within. This quiet devotion, witnessed only by the rustling leaves and the distant chirping of birds, highlighted Arthur's inherent goodness, his capacity for love still very much alive, channeled into the unassuming dog at his feet. Buster, despite his general anxiety and occasional clumsiness, sometimes exhibited strange, almost hyper-aware behaviors directed specifically at Arthur. These incidents were subtle, easily dismissed by an outsider, or even by Arthur himself. He might be sitting in his armchair, reading the newspaper, when Buster would suddenly approach. Instead of nudging his hand for attention or a scratch behind the ear, Buster would sniff intensely at Arthur's chest, his small, wet nose twitching, almost as if he were trying to pick up a scent that wasn't there. Then, he would whine softly, a persistent low sound, and continue to sniff, his anxious eyes fixed on Arthur. Or, there were times when Buster would become unusually agitated. He'd pace back and forth in the living room, a restless energy vibrating through his small body. He'd nudge Arthur's hand, then his arm, then whine again, his movements insistent, almost desperate. A few minutes later, Arthur might feel a slight, dismissible discomfort in his left arm, a fleeting twinge he attributed to age or an awkward sleeping position, or a sudden, momentary shortness of breath that passed quickly, which he shrugged off as just getting older. Arthur dismissed these incidents as Buster's nervous habits, attributing the sniffing to a canine quirk or the pacing to simple boredom. He'd pat Buster's head, murmur, "It's all right, boy, just being a dog," and return to his reading, oblivious. He believed it was just canine intuition, nothing more than a dog's anxiety-driven quirks. He was unaware, as he gently pushed Buster away, that these seemingly random acts were early, subtle warning signs. He didn't know that Buster possessed an unusual, innate perception, an uncanny ability to sense the subtle shifts in Arthur's declining health, a hidden language only Buster truly spoke. The quiet echoes of emptiness in Arthur's life were about to be shattered by a silent alarm, sounded by the most unassuming of companions. The quiet Tuesday afternoon, usually a sanctuary of predictable routine, was suddenly rent by a sharp, excruciating pain that flared in Arthur Finch's chest. He had been in his living room, attempting to read the day's newspaper, the words blurring before his eyes as a dull ache had begun to settle behind his sternum. Now, it was no longer dull. It was a searing fire, an invisible hand clutching his heart. He gasped, a guttural sound that caught in his throat, clutching at the thin fabric of his shirt. The newspaper slipped from his numb fingers, fluttering silently to the worn rug as Arthur collapsed, his breath catching in ragged, desperate gasps. His body crumpled, a silent heap on the floor, the world spinning into a dizzying vortex of pain and fading consciousness. Buster, who had been dozing contentedly by the fireplace, his floppy ear twitching in a dream, reacted instantly. His anxious eyes snapped open, sensing the sudden, terrifying shift in the room's energy. He leapt to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his hackles rising. Instead of barking wildly or cowering in fear, he exhibited an extraordinary, intelligent response. He nudged Arthur's still form with his nose, whimpering softly. When Arthur remained unresponsive, his breath a faint, shallow rasp, Buster barked sharply, once, then repeatedly, a series of urgent, insistent yelps that filled the quiet house. He nudged Arthur's hand again, then his cheek, trying desperately to rouse his beloved owner. When Arthur still didn't stir, Buster's eyes darted around the room, a desperate intelligence shining in them. He raced to the wall-mounted emergency alarm cord, a thin, red string installed by Clara months ago, a precautionary measure that Arthur had always scoffed at, dismissing it as fuss. Buster stood on his hind legs, paws scrabbling against the wall, tugging at it frantically, his small body straining. The cord, however, was just out of his reach. When that failed, a new idea seemed to spark in his intelligent eyes. With a desperate leap, he launched himself onto a small side table, a precarious perch laden with Arthur's old corded telephone. The phone teetered, then crashed to the floor, the impact accidentally dialing 911. The faint, distorted voice of a dispatcher crackled from the dropped receiver, barely audible amidst Buster's frantic barking. "Next door. Mrs. Henderson. a kind but somewhat nosy elderly woman who often kept a watchful eye on Arthur's quiet house, heard the commotion. At first, she merely grumbled. "Oh, it's just that noisy dog again, stirring up trouble." She was initially dismissive of Buster's frantic barks, attributing them to boredom or agitation. But then, a strange, distorted sound reached her ears through the shared wall, a faint, garbled voice, almost like a cry for help. Her curiosity piqued. She peered through her living room window, seeing Buster's silhouette darting frantically within Arthur's house. Concerned, she came to investigate. Her knock on Arthur's front door met by Buster's insistent, frantic barks. She called out, "Arthur, is everything all right?" And when no answer came, she peered through the window, her eyes widening in horror at the sight of Arthur's still form on the floor. She immediately called 911 on her own phone, her voice trembling. Arthur was rushed to the hospital, his life hanging by a thread. He was critically ill, his breathing labored, his face ashen. He was immediately placed in the intensive care unit ICU, a sterile, beeping world of tubes and monitors. Buster, left behind in the chaotic aftermath of paramedics and flashing lights, was distraught. He whined inconsolably by the empty front door, his anxiety palpable, his body trembling. The sudden absence of Arthur, the only constant in his quiet life, was a profound shock. Arthur's niece, Clara Reynolds, a dedicated but financially stretched paralegal, arrived from out of town, her face pale with shock and exhaustion. She was instantly overwhelmed by the situation. The hospital room felt cold and alien, Arthur's fragile state a stark reminder of her own limitations. She saw Buster, whining mournfully at the foot of Arthur's hospital bed, then later clinging to Arthur's worn slippers by the front door of the house. While acknowledging his frantic behavior during the incident, she viewed him not as a hero, but as a burden, an unpredictable complication, especially with her uncle so ill. Her immediate thought, pragmatic and desperate, was to take him to a shelter. Who will care for him? She worried aloud to her husband, David, her voice tight with stress. He's clearly agitated after all this. It's too much for me to handle right now. She saw his agitation as stress, not heroism, not a testament to his intelligence. Buster sensed her rejection keenly, his tail drooping, his anxious eyes losing their spark. Yet, his deep, unwavering loyalty to Arthur fueled his desperate determination to stay close, clinging to Arthur's worn slippers as if they were a lifeline, unwilling to be separated from the last tangible link to his beloved owner. He lay by the front door, his ears perked, listening for Arthur's return, a silent sentinel of hope. While Arthur lay critically ill in the ICU, the attending physician, a kind but direct man, informed Clara of the grim reality. "Ms. Reynolds," he said gently, "Mr. Finch has suffered a massive heart attack. He will need extensive, long-term care, likely requiring a nursing home or constant, round-the-clock in-home medical supervision." He paused, his gaze sympathetic. "He will not be able to return home alone." The words hung heavy in the air, a death knell for Arthur's independent life. Clara's own financial situation was extremely strained. Her paralegal salary, while respectable, barely covered her own family's needs. Long-term nursing home care, or hiring a full-time caregiver, was simply impossible. A financial black hole she couldn't afford. Her husband, David, ever the practical one, voiced the unthinkable. "Clara," he said softly, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "His house. It might be the only viable option, to cover the medical costs." Selling Arthur's small, beloved house, the last connection to his late wife, Eleanor, felt like a betrayal, but David saw it as the only path forward. Buster, curled under Arthur's favorite armchair, his ears perked, overheard this conversation. His body stiffened. He let out a soft, guttural growl, a sound of deep distress. He paced anxiously around the living room, his head low, his tail tucked between his legs, showing intense distress when Clara discussed selling the house. He nudged Arthur's favorite armchair repeatedly, then whined softly, a desperate, mournful sound, as if pleading for something he couldn't articulate. This conversation, unheard by Arthur but absorbed by Buster with alarming clarity, put him in direct opposition to Clara's plans. The stakes were dramatically raised. Arthur's life, his cherished home, and Buster's own uncertain future were now inextricably intertwined, creating an unavoidable crisis that Buster sensed with an almost human understanding. The quiet alarm Buster had sounded for Arthur's health had now become a desperate plea for their shared future, a crisis he instinctively knew he had to confront. The house, once Arthur's tranquil sanctuary, now felt like a cage of frantic anxiety for Clara Reynolds. Arthur lay in the sterile, beeping silence of the ICU, his life hanging by a thread. The weight of his medical needs, the endless forms, the conversations with doctors about long-term care all pressed down on Clara, a dedicated paralegal whose life was already stretched thin, managing his affairs, which included his home, his finances, and now, his bewildered, anxious dog, felt like an impossible burden. Clara moved through Arthur's house, her movements sharp with frustration. Her heart ached for her uncle, but the sheer logistics of the situation were overwhelming. Her immediate concern was Arthur's heart medication. The attending physician had stressed its importance, especially a particular type of nitroglycerin that Arthur was supposed to take regularly. Arthur, meticulous in his ways, had always kept his vital medications meticulously hidden, a habit from his days in military service where discretion was paramount. Clara, however, had no idea where. She searched frantically medicine cabinets, kitchen drawers, desk compartments. Her frustration mounted with each empty space, her breath coming in short, exasperated puffs. "Where on earth did he put it?" she muttered, raking a hand through her hair. "Uncle Arthur, why did you have to hide everything?" Buster, sensing her mounting distress, trotted to her side. He watched her frantic movements, his anxious eyes taking in her increasingly harried expression. He had been quietly following her, a silent observer of her struggle. When Clara finally sank onto the living room sofa, defeated, Buster trotted over to a specific, unassuming, antique wooden box on a high shelf in the corner of the room. A box Arthur always kept locked. Buster stood on his hind legs, paws scratching lightly at the polished wood, then whined softly, a persistent, low sound. He then nudged a small, ornate key on Arthur's bedside table, a key Clara had overlooked in her earlier frantic search, its intricate design blending with the bedside clutter. Clara, initially dismissive of Buster's antics, "Not now, Buster, I don't have time for games," grudgingly followed his lead, the scratching, the whining, the insistent nudging of the key. It was all so out of character for the usually quiet dog. With a sigh of exasperation, she picked up the key. It was old, intricately carved, completely unlike any modern key. She walked over to the wooden box Buster was still nudging. To her astonishment, the ornate key fit perfectly into the box's hidden lock. With a soft click, the lid opened. Inside, nestled amongst cotton swabs and sterile wipes, was Arthur's emergency nitroglycerin, perfectly organized and labeled. This was the first undeniable display of Buster's extraordinary, intelligent problem-solving, compelled by necessity. Clara stared at the medication, then at Buster, her skepticism giving way to a dawning realization. This was more than just canine intuition. This was intelligent direction. She started to acknowledge his unusual intelligence, though still with a degree of skepticism, a pragmatic paralegal's need for irrefutable proof. A few days later, a skeptical social worker, Ms. Albright, arrived at Arthur's house. She was assigned to Arthur's case to assess his living conditions and Buster's suitability, given Arthur's fragile state. Ms. Albright was a no-nonsense professional. her demeanor all business. She was initially concerned about Buster's presence, viewing him as a potential disruptive factor that could complicate Arthur's recovery, even suggesting he be placed elsewhere. She questioned Clara about Buster's temperament, his medical history, and his behavior during the heart attack incident, her pen poised to note any perceived flaw. During her visit, as Ms. Albright sat in the living room, Buster approached Arthur's favorite armchair. He nudged a small, red device that Arthur had accidentally knocked behind his bed during his collapse, a medical alert button that, had it been accessible, might have summoned help sooner. Buster whined softly, pushing the device with his nose. Ms. Albright, observing the dog, watched as Buster then trotted to the kitchen and nudged a specific bag of dietary supplements on the counter, then looked pointedly at Clara. Clara, remembering Arthur's strict dietary regimen, realized Buster was indicating Arthur's supplements. Ms. Albright, a trained observer, was grudgingly impressed. She saw Buster guide Clara to Arthur's specific dietary supplements, nudge the medical alert device, and even retrieve Arthur's prescription bottle from a high shelf in the kitchen, confirming he knew its purpose. Her professional skepticism, initially a wall, began to crack, giving way to a nascent curiosity about the dog's uncanny awareness. This dog, she realized, was more than just a pet. He was an active, intelligent participant in Arthur's care. Simultaneously, a manipulative, distant cousin, Philip Finch, swooped into Arthur's life. Philip was Arthur's ambitious and greedy next of kin, a man in his early 50s with a slick smile and eyes that constantly assessed value. He learned of Arthur's heart attack through a distant family grapevine and immediately saw an opportunity for Arthur's inheritance. He arrived at the hospital, ostensibly to help Clara, showering her with false sympathy. But his true intentions were to discreetly look around Arthur's house, searching for any hidden assets or a will that might stand in his way. He immediately noticed Buster. Buster, usually quiet and withdrawn around strangers, reacted to Philip with an unusual intensity. He would growl softly whenever Philip came near Arthur's personal items, especially the old writing desk or the safe hidden behind a painting. He barked fiercely whenever Philip tried to casually look around the house, his protective behavior around Arthur's possessions and around Clara a stark contrast to his usual placid demeanor. Philip quickly identified Buster as a potential threat to his plans, an unpredictable animal who seemed to instinctively understand his malicious intent. He saw the dog's fierce loyalty as an obstacle, a furry guardian standing between him and Arthur's inheritance. Driven by greed and a desire to eliminate any obstacles to Arthur's will, Philip Finch quietly set his plan in motion. He contacted animal control, crafting a fabricated story. Yes, he told the dispatcher, his voice dripping with false concern. It's an older gentleman, Mr. Arthur Finch. He's had a severe heart attack, now in the ICU. His dog, a scruffy mutt named Buster, has become incredibly aggressive since the incident. Bit me, even, and the living conditions. Terrible. Really. Unsuitable for the dog, given the owner's incapacitation. I'm just so worried for its safety, and the safety of others. He even went a step further, subtly planting a false negative report about Buster with the local shelter's intake department, ensuring it would be on Buster's file when he arrived. The report painted Buster as unmanageable, prone to nipping, and displaying unpredictable behavior. This act of malicious sabotage, hidden from Clara, was a calculated move to remove Buster permanently. Clara was devastated when animal control arrived the next morning. 2 uniformed officers, polite but firm, explained they had received a report of an aggressive, neglected animal. Buster, confused and terrified, whined and struggled as they led him away. Clara protested vehemently, denying the claims, but the officers, citing protocol and the official report, were unmoved. She watched helplessly as Buster, his anxious eyes filled with betrayal, was led out of the house, disappearing into the back of a sterile white van. Philip, feigning sympathy, put a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder, a triumphant glint in his eyes that only Buster would have recognized. Clara was left alone, overwhelmed, her unexpected ally snatched away just as she was beginning to understand his true value. The dog's unseen language had been misunderstood, leading him directly into the shadow of the shelter. The sterile scent of disinfectant, sharp and cold, assaulted Buster's sensitive nose. The cacophony of frantic barks, whimpers, and howls from dozens of unseen animals assaulted his ears. He was no longer in Arthur's quiet, familiar home, nor in the comforting, albeit chaotic, atmosphere of the hospital hallway where he'd last seen Clara. He was in a small, cold kennel, its wire mesh a stark barrier, its concrete floor unforgiving. This was the local animal shelter, a symbolic prison, an oppressive environment that was the antithesis of the warmth and predictability of Arthur's home. This was where he faced his ultimate test of loyalty and intelligence, separated from the only human he truly trusted. Buster was heartbroken and disoriented. His anxious eyes, usually darting, now held a profound sadness. He whined incessantly, a low, mournful sound, pacing his tiny kennel, his paws slipping on the cold floor. He felt profoundly alone and misunderstood amidst the cacophony of the shelter, the desperate cries of other animals echoing his own internal turmoil. He didn't understand why he was there, why Clara hadn't fought harder, why Arthur wasn't there to rescue him. His deep, unwavering loyalty to Arthur became a burning ache in his chest, a desperate longing to be reunited. He had done nothing wrong, yet he was confined, his future uncertain. Meanwhile, Clara was devastated by Buster's sudden and cruel removal. The house felt even emptier without his quiet presence, his anxious whines now replaced by a chilling silence. Philip Finch, ever the manipulative snake, feigned sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he'd say, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder, his eyes gleaming with false concern. "It's for the best. You know, he was too much for you, with Uncle Arthur so ill. I'll help you find a new home for him," he promised, subtly sabotaging her efforts to contact the shelter or local rescue groups. He'd accidentally misplace phone numbers, forget to relay messages, or subtly disparage Buster to potential adopters Clara found. He even suggested shelters that were known for their strict intake policies and high euthanasia rates, all under the guise of finding the best solution. Clara felt increasingly isolated and helpless in her battle to bring Buster back. The bureaucratic red tape of the shelter system was a labyrinth she couldn't navigate alone. The shelter staff, overwhelmed and overworked, saw only the negative report planted by Philip, making Buster seem dangerous or unmanageable. They were polite but firm, citing policy, unable to see the heroic dog beneath the fabricated claims. Clara struggled against their protocols and Philip's insidious advice, her spirit weary, her resolve weakening under the relentless pressure. Adding to the agonizing pressure was the shelter's strict 72-hour holding policy. For strays or surrendered animals like Buster, it was a ticking clock 72 hours before they were officially put up for adoption, or worse, euthanized due to overcrowding and lack of space. Every tick of the clock was an agonizing reminder of Buster's precarious fate. Clara's phone vibrated with automated messages from the shelter, detailing the grim timeline. She imagined Buster, alone and terrified, in his cold kennel, and her heart ached with guilt and helplessness. Simultaneously, a new, desperate crisis unfolded at the hospital. Arthur's condition, which had seemed stable after Buster's intervention, took a sudden, critical turn for the worse. His heart, already weakened, began to falter again. He developed a severe blood clot, a complication the doctors had not anticipated. He needed a specific, rare medication, an experimental anticoagulant. That was not standard protocol. Unbeknownst to Clara, Arthur, in his meticulous way, had been secretly researching experimental treatments for his specific heart condition, a final desperate hope he'd kept to himself. He had hidden a tiny, folded medical note detailing his last wishes regarding this experimental treatment and the location of a crucial document about his true will, tucked away inside a rare antique locket he kept on his nightstand. He had subtly taught Buster to retrieve the special shine, a playful gesture that now, in his unconscious state, was impossible to communicate. Only Buster implicitly knew about this hidden note, about the locket's significance, having been trained by Arthur through quiet, playful interactions that were a secret language between them. The doctors, baffled by the sudden complication, discussed options, but none included the experimental drug Arthur had meticulously researched. Clara was informed that Arthur's chances of survival were rapidly diminishing without an immediate, specific intervention that they couldn't identify. This medical crisis for Arthur, unknown to Clara but implicitly sensed by Buster, made the dog's return not just desired, but crucial for Arthur's very survival, adding a second, desperate ticking clock to the narrative. Buster, miles away in his sterile kennel, felt an acute surge of anxiety, a telepathic pang that resonated with Arthur's deteriorating condition. He whined louder, more insistently, his instincts screaming that Arthur was in danger. His fate, and Arthur's, hung precariously in the balance, with only 72 hours before Buster's time ran out. The shadow of the shelter loomed large, a cold prison against Buster's desperate, unspoken plea for his owner's life. A primal scream of anxiety ripped through Buster's small body. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a telepathic pang that resonated deep within his bones. Arthur, his human. The constant thrum of his presence, the steady heartbeat Buster had always implicitly monitored, had faltered. The acute surge of distress from miles away in the sterile confines of his kennel was unmistakable. Arthur was in danger. His life. Buster knew with an instinct far beyond mere canine comprehension, was slipping away. The clock was ticking. With a desperate resolve that defied his anxious nature, Buster orchestrated a daring escape from the shelter. He paced his kennel, his eyes darting, his floppy ear twitching, taking in every detail of his surroundings. He noticed the faulty latch on his wire mesh door, weakened by constant use. He nudged it once, then again, carefully, testing its resistance. With a final determined push of his nose, the latch gave way with a soft click. He slipped through the narrow opening, a silent shadow in the dim, echoing hallway. He then moved with uncanny intelligence. An attendant, distracted by a particularly vocal dog in a far-off kennel, had left a service door barely ajar, a sliver of light illuminating a path to freedom. Buster squeezed through, his small body agile, his heart pounding. He then created a strategic distraction, sniffing at a pile of discarded food wrappers near a motion sensor alarm, triggering a high-pitched whine that sent the distracted attendant rushing to investigate. In the ensuing confusion, the main gate to the dog run, momentarily opened, allowed Buster to slip out, a blur of scruffy fur disappearing into the cold night. He burst onto the dangerous, unfamiliar city streets. The cold pavement was hard on his paws, but he ignored the pain. His desperate journey began, driven by an unwavering, instinctual need to reach Arthur at the hospital. He squeezed through narrow alleyways, his body a sleek dart, dodging discarded trash and looming shadows. He darted across bustling intersections, a tiny, courageous figure weaving through speeding traffic, the blare of horns a distant roar. Every muscle in his small body strained, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his floppy ear flapping in the wind as he ran. Fear, exhaustion, pain. They were abstract concepts. All that mattered was the unseen goal, the pull towards Arthur, the silent plea echoing in his heart. He ran until his lungs burned, his legs ached, and the city lights blurred into a streak of desperate hope. Finally, Buster reached Arthur's hospital, a towering beacon of antiseptic light in the darkness. He burst through the automatic doors of the emergency entrance, his entry perhaps triggering a soft alarm that drew the attention of a surprised nurse. He ignored the startled stares, his nose twitching, guiding him through the antiseptic corridors. He raced past bustling nurses' stations, ignoring shouted warnings, his instincts leading him through the labyrinthine hospital. He found Arthur's ICU room not by a number, but by scent and memory, the faint, familiar scent of Arthur's aftershave, of old books, of home. He burst into Arthur's ICU room, barking frantically, a sound of pure desperation. Clara, who was sitting by Arthur's bedside, her face drawn with worry, startled, beside her. A furious Philip Finch was standing over Arthur, a pen poised, attempting to manipulate Arthur's medical power of attorney and locate a hidden will. His greedy eyes fixed on Arthur's almost flatlining monitor. He whirled around, enraged by Buster's intrusion. "What is this menace doing here?" Philip roared, his face contorted with fury. He tried to kick Buster out, yelling about the dog being a menace and a distraction. For a moment, it seemed Buster would be caught and removed again, his heroic efforts in vain. Arthur's medical monitor continued its alarming, rhythmic flatline, its urgent beeping filling the room. The scene was chaotic. Buster's frantic barking, Philip's enraged shouting, Clara's gasped cries of surprise, and the urgent, terrifying beeping of Arthur's deteriorating medical monitor. Philip lunged, intending to seize Buster and drag him out. But then, with a final, desperate burst of energy, Buster managed to grab a specific vital item Arthur had hidden, Arthur's hand, which had been resting limply on the nightstand, moved almost imperceptibly. Buster, seeing the faint glimmer, nudged the rare, antique locket Arthur kept on his nightstand. It was a locket Buster had been taught to retrieve the special shine. He nudged it repeatedly. Then, with a final desperate jump, he managed to grasp it in his teeth, pulling it just out of Philip's reach. The locket, dislodged, popped open, revealing a tiny folded medical note detailing Arthur's last wishes regarding experimental treatment, and a cryptic reference to a crucial document about his true will, secured in his old military footlocker. The shift in the faces of those witnessing was dramatic, a tableau of dawning realization. Clara, initially overwhelmed and disbelieving, watched Buster's actions with dawning realization. Her skepticism transformed into profound understanding, then utter awe and gratitude as she saw the note and understood Buster's desperate message. She snatched the locket and its contents, her eyes wide with a new, fierce determination. Philip was left speechless, his face contorted in disbelief and exposed greed as Buster's actions inadvertently highlighted his manipulative intent and his true, heinous purpose. Hospital staff, initially dismissive of a stray dog bursting into the ICU, were now awestruck by Buster's intelligent and desperate actions, their professional detachment replaced by a stunned fascination. Arthur, regaining a flicker of consciousness, his eyes barely open, managed a weak, loving smile. His gaze, though hazy, found Buster's, a silent confirmation of Buster's devotion and extraordinary intelligence. The urgent beeping of Arthur's monitor, still alarming, now seemed to punctuate the gravity of Buster's revelation. Clara's kind-hearted husband, David, who had arrived just moments before the chaos, and who had secretly distrusted Philip, stepped forward, his quiet support for Buster also helping to validate the dog's actions. "He's trying to tell us something," David exclaimed, seeing the locket in Clara's hand. The timely intervention for Arthur, directly triggered by Buster's desperate actions and the revelation of the locket's contents, exposed Philip's scheme and provided the missing link for Arthur's life-saving treatment. Clara, her voice trembling but firm, relayed the note's instructions to the attending physician, who, upon reviewing the note and Buster's extraordinary actions, immediately initiated the experimental anticoagulant. Philip, his plans ruined, was quickly escorted out by hospital security, his enraged shouting fading into the distance, Buster, exhausted but triumphant, collapsed by Arthur's bedside, his eyes still fixed on his human, his devotion unwavering. The desperate run had ended, and the unseen thread of his loyalty had saved Arthur's life, leading to his glorious vindication. The city, which had just hours ago been a frantic stage for the Shadow Killer's final act, was now bathed in the calm, pale light of dawn. The capture of the notorious killer atop the clock tower sent a collective sigh of relief rippling through every street, every home. But within the Midtown precinct, the atmosphere was a mix of exhaustion, triumph, and a subtle, undeniable shift in power dynamics. Officer Ethan Hayes, his face smudged with fatigue but his eyes clear and resolute, stood quietly to the side as the media descended, hungry for details. The fallout for Detective Mark Reynolds was immediate and severe. His face, still pale with humiliation from the night's events, was plastered across every news channel, juxtaposed with reports of his misjudgment and the daring, unconventional deduction that had saved the day. The internal investigation into his attempts to obstruct Ethan's access and spread rumors had been swift. Captain Thorne, now seeing clearly the depths of Reynolds' ambition and his willingness to undermine a colleague, had taken decisive action. Reynolds faced professional repercussions that far outweighed his previous successes. He was stripped of his detective badge and demoted to a desk job in a less prestigious, highly bureaucratic unit, effectively sidelined from any meaningful investigative work. His once flawless reputation was irrevocably tarnished. His career trajectory, which he had so meticulously crafted, had crashed and burned. The man who thrived on public adulation now withered under public scorn. His downfall a stark, fitting consequence of his arrogance and petty jealousy. Captain Thorne, a man of rigid protocol and a deep-seated belief in the department's image, was visibly humbled. The chief's commendation of Ethan's actions, broadcast live from HQ, had been a clear directive. Thorne, ever pragmatic, understood the need for public reconciliation. The next morning, in a precinct-wide briefing, Thorne stood before his officers, his voice firm but laced with a humility few had ever witnessed. "Last night," he began, his gaze briefly meeting Ethan's, "we averted a catastrophe, and we did so, not through conventional means, but through the extraordinary insight of one of our own." He paused, taking a deep breath. Officer Ethan Hayes, his meticulous observations, his dedication to the cold case, and his uncanny ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, were instrumental. He saw the truth when the rest of us were looking in the wrong direction. Thorne's eyes swept across the room, lingering on Reynolds, who stared at his shoes. "I admit," Thorne continued, his voice steady, "I was skeptical. I questioned his methods. I misjudged his abilities. That was my error, and I publicly acknowledge it. Officer Hayes acted with courage and integrity, even when he was doubted. He is a credit to this department." It was a public statement of acknowledgement, a rare admission of fault from Captain Thorne, marking the beginning of a process of genuine respect and mentorship towards Ethan. The rigid, by-the-book captain had been forced to confront his own biases, and in doing so, had found a new appreciation for unconventional genius. The city, exhausted but grateful, hailed Ethan as a hero. His name, once a quiet murmur in the archives, was now on every headline. He received commendations from the mayor, the chief, and countless civic organizations, media outlets, once quick to mock his eccentricities, now lined up to interview the architect of silence, the unseen detective. He handled it all with his characteristic quiet demeanor, deflecting praise to Dr. Sharma and the task force, but accepting the recognition with a subtle, internal sense of satisfaction. The most significant reward, however, was not the public accolades, but the profound new opportunity that emerged. Days after the killer's capture, Chief Miller, fully aware of the public's restored faith in the department due to Ethan, summoned him to his office. The chief, a shrewd politician as much as a law enforcer, had seen the invaluable asset Ethan represented. "Hayes," the chief began, his voice devoid of its usual bluster, a newfound respect in his tone. "What you did, it was unprecedented. You saw what no one else could. Your skills are unique, and frankly, we need them." He leaned forward, a serious expression on his face. "I'm offering you a new position, a new unit, effective immediately. You will head the newly formed Cold Case and Pattern Analysis Unit. You'll have full access to resources, a dedicated team, and the autonomy to pursue cases that fit your particular methods." Ethan felt a surge of emotion he rarely allowed himself. This was more than just a promotion. It was a validation of his entire being. This opportunity was not just about status. It allowed him to fully utilize his unique skills and obsessive attention to detail, transforming his perceived weaknesses into strengths. He would no longer be confined to archiving the dead. He would be actively breathing life into them, using his mind to solve the unsolvable. He envisioned a team of quiet, meticulous individuals, perhaps others like himself, who found patterns in chaos, who saw the unseen threads. Later that week, as the precinct slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, Ethan had a quiet, meaningful conversation with Dr. Anya Sharma. Her office, once a refuge for the disgraced, now hummed with a renewed sense of purpose. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from other departments, seeking her unconventional expertise. "We did it, Anya," Ethan said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. He was sitting in her office, the aroma of herbal tea filling the air. "Dr." Sharma smiled, her sharp eyes twinkling. "No, Ethan, you did it. I just translated your mind. It's truly extraordinary. You see the world in a way no one else does." "And you believed me," Ethan countered, looking at her directly. "When no one else would. When everyone was so quick to dismiss me, to mock my quirks." He paused, reflecting. "It hurt. You know, all those years of being the archivist, the cold case haze, the feeling of being invisible, or worse, ridiculed for the very thing that was my strength." "I know it did, Ethan," Dr. Sharma said gently. "But sometimes, the greatest gifts are born from the deepest wounds. That pain, that isolation. It forced you to hone your skills in secret, to rely solely on your own perception. It forged you." "It fueled me," Ethan conceded, a flicker of that past bitterness in his voice. "Every sneer from Reynolds, every dismissive wave from Thorne, it pushed me further into those files, made me dig deeper. I wanted to prove them wrong. But more than that," he continued, his voice softening, "I wanted to prove it to myself, that my way of seeing things mattered, that these patterns weren't just in my head. And now they know," Dr. Sharma stated simply. "The whole city knows. The chief knows. Thorne knows." She gestured towards his new departmental commendation certificate, proudly displayed on her wall. "Your true strength lay in embracing your uniqueness, Ethan, not in conforming, but in believing in what only you could see." He nodded, a sense of deep peace settling over him. "The chief offered me a new unit, cold case and pattern analysis." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "I want you on my team. Anya, as lead consultant, I need your insights, your ability to translate my patterns into actionable intelligence. We can build something truly groundbreaking, find justice for all those forgotten cases." Dr. Sharma's smile widened, a genuine, delighted grin. "It would be an honor, Ethan, a genuine honor. Together, we can unlock the silence." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of the city outside a distant lullaby. Ethan, the man who had once been defined by the shadows of the archives, had emerged into the light, not as a different person, but as the truest version of himself. He had found his place, his quiet demeanor now seen as a mark of profound concentration rather than awkwardness. The resolution was clear. The city had found its unseen guardian, and Ethan, the architect of silence, had finally found his voice. 3 years later. The Midtown precinct still hummed with the ceaseless rhythm of police work, but its pulse felt different, more attuned, perhaps, to the unseen currents that flowed beneath the surface of the city. Officer Ethan Hayes, once a quiet, overlooked figure in the archives, was now a respected and slightly enigmatic figure within its walls. His office, still cluttered with the organized chaos of case files and forensic texts, was no longer a personal refuge, but the command center of the highly successful cold case and pattern analysis unit. His unit had become legendary, solving multiple cold cases that had baffled detectives for decades, and even preventing new crimes by predicting patterns before they fully materialized. Ethan's almost supernatural ability to crack the unsolvable, to connect the disparate, was no longer a subject of mockery but of awe. His slightly disheveled look and perpetual glasses were now seen not as signs of awkwardness, but as marks of profound concentration, the outward manifestation of a mind perpetually sifting through the universe of details. He had found his place, a purpose that resonated with the very core of his being. Dr. Anya Sharma sat opposite him most days, her sharp eyes twinkling as she translated his intricate deductions into actionable strategies for their team. Their dynamic was a seamless blend of his intuitive genius and her methodical expertise. Their dedicated team, a small but fiercely loyal group of analysts and detectives, understood and valued his unique methods, learning to see the world through the same lens of meticulous detail. They were a testament to the power of embracing individuality, a microcosm of the change Ethan had brought to the department. Ethan had not forgotten the mockery, the isolation that had once defined him. It was a scar, but one that now served as a powerful reminder of his journey. As a mandatory act of paying it forward, he established a mentorship program within the department, informally at first, then officially. It was for young, unconventional officers who struggled to fit into the rigid structure, but who possessed unique skills of photographic memory, an uncanny ability to read body language, a knack for languages, or an obsessive eye for detail. He shared his story, not with bitterness, but with a quiet strength, teaching them to trust their instincts, to embrace their quirks as strengths. He became a champion for diversity of thought in policing, ensuring that other Ethans were recognized, nurtured, and utilized, preventing others from suffering the same isolation he had endured. His goal was to build a department where every unique mind found its purpose, where no talent was overlooked. Late one night, as the city lights twinkled outside his office window, a distant hum of urban life replacing the precinct's earlier bustle, Ethan sat at his desk. A complex new cold case file lay open before him, the disappearance of a young tech innovator, a puzzle with no obvious leads. He was hunched over it, just as he had been years ago over the Nightingale murders. But now there was a subtle difference. A faint smile touched his lips, a rare, almost imperceptible curve. He was meticulously drawing connections between seemingly unrelated data points, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside him. The worn leather notebook, now filled to the brim with successful deductions and insights, lay open beside him, a silent testament to countless hours of unseen work, of truths unearthed from the shadows. He was the unseen guardian, the quiet genius, forever poring over the details, connecting the threads that bound the universe of crime together. His journey, from being mocked for his perceived oddities to becoming the department's most invaluable asset, was a living testament to the power of embracing one's unique skills and the triumph of the underestimated. The silence that once defined him had become the canvas upon which he painted justice, one meticulous stroke at a time. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.